Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown, and this is going to be a bit of a different episode than what you're probably used to. And the reason for that is because we have to start it with a bit of a disclaimer. So for those of you that have been following the show for a while, you're probably aware of the fact that I professionally work as a paramedic in Calgary. Now, the conversation that we're going to have today revolves around paramedics, and it revolves around the state of the EMS system. Obviously, there's a bit of a potential conflict of interest for me to be having this conversation. So there's a couple of things that I need to disclose right out of the gates. First of all, I do not share any of my own personal opinions in this conversation. And I also do not use or provide any information that I have gotten through my role. This is a conversation with Mike Parker, who is the president of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, or the union that represents paramedics in Alberta. All of the information that you're going to hear in this episode of The Breakdown, or watching this episode of The Breakdown, is coming straight from Mike. It is not coming from me. I also need to be very, very clear that the views that you're about to see in this podcast do not represent anyone other than Mike Parker, and they do not represent the views of Alberta Health Services. I need to be very, very clear about that because I don't want it to be construed in any way that I am speaking for Alberta Health Services or that Mike is speaking for Alberta Health Services. My role tonight is to be the host of The Breakdown, and that is all that I'm doing here. So if it seems like there's some points in the conversation where I'm asking questions that you would expect I know the answer to, I am. And that's because I'm trying to be as objective as I possibly can during this very important conversation. So without further ado, here's our conversation with the president of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, Mike Parker. It is very exciting, if not somewhat nerve-wracking, to welcome Mike Parker to the show. Mike, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, thank you, Nate, for the invite. Absolute pleasure to be here.
So just for a little bit of context, because I want to make sure that the information that we're giving is as accurate as possible given the situation, we are talking on November 30th. And the reason why I make that date clear, I suspect is going to become more clear as we get a little bit farther into the conversation. But before we get into what we're really here to talk about, we always like to make sure that we provide a little bit of backstory and context. So if you don't mind giving us the story of who is Mike Parker and how did you get to be in your role with HSAA?
Thanks, Nate. I started off my career in emergency medicine. I was a volunteer in the town of Coaldale. I worked in small services in northern Alberta, eventually landing in the city of Edmonton in '96. From there, I became a union vice president within the CUPE locals. And from there, as government transitioned unions, I joined with HSAA and became the vice president. And today I sit as the president of a 29,000 member union, all of frontline healthcare workers within this province.
Okay. That was short.
We got some good stuff to talk about here. Let's get to it, man.
That's cool. So, I know that it's going to come up as soon as we announce that we're having someone from a union on the show. So let's just get the inevitable ugly question out of the way. Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I have never been a member of the Communist Party. Let's just put that right clear on the table. Although they got some pretty cool ideas, but I'm just saying, I do not know. Yeah, that's a good start. That's a good start.
I've come to know the people who comment on our stuff fairly well, and so I like to get it out of the way. HSAA stands for
the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, formed in 1971 in the Misericordia Hospital, and as from then till now has grown to allied health. We have over 240 different disciplines represented within our union, Nate. Everything from lab techs, x-ray, paramedics, you name it, we are it. And it's quite an amazing and diverse union, that's for sure.
Okay. Now, I also want to do a little bit of history here because I think that informs part of the conversation that we're going to have here tonight. For quite a while, EMS was not the jurisdiction of the province. It was handled by municipalities. When did that change happen? And to your understanding, why did that change happen?
Okay, let's push it back even further. It used to be run by private services all over the province. City of Edmonton was under Smith's ambulance. I am at a loss for the Calgary company. It was running way back in the day. But these were private companies that were taken over by municipalities, mostly because of billing improprieties. Let's be crystal clear on why, because the private guys were double billing everybody. And this is what was going on back then. Cities take it over. And in 2009, there was a move to consolidate. And so the province decided in their infinite wisdom that we're going to make one big provincial EMS service. We even had our employer at the time say, hey, if you're on vacation in Jasper and maybe your spouse is asleep and you want to go grab a shift, you can just go over there and get, like, what a weird thing. Like, you're telling me that borderless system, that sounds amazing. Well, they've buggered that up, haven't they? So, 12 years later, we still sit with this system. I mean, okay, I just want to go back in the private days when you'd answer the 911 phone in your house and you'd have to try and figure out which ditch the car is in because that side is a different town, different company, and you're fighting for patients. Like, that's what it was like back then. So today is better, almost. They've gone from a system of municipalities and accountability to the municipality to this broad borderless system, Grand Prairie, Medicine Hat, everywhere in between, you name it. But it's not just that. It's not that, because we've got crews being assigned across country or across province coverage. We've got some really weird stuff going on today that just doesn't make any sense.
Okay. So if for just a little bit of context, other than the picking up shifts in Jasper, what were some of the rationales that the province put forward in regards to going to a provincial system?
Always use the word efficiency in this conversation, financially with a larger package, right? So now you've got one purchasing point. You've got the power of the purchasing of AHS versus just a municipality. All these pieces, they talked about getting a regional dispatch center coordinated. That took 10 years. They piled that one up too. But all of these things we're talking about efficiencies. And it's funny, when it happened, city councils were very quick to click control, delete on everything that was EMS within the municipality. And in Edmonton, they went, oh, look, we got a budget surplus of $15 million. We don't understand why. And they shut their mouths after that. They went, whoop, never mind. We're not going to talk about that. Because now the province had taken over the funding of the system. And when they did that, Edmonton suddenly became, and Calgary too, this regional response district. I was using my cell phone along with a dispatcher using Google Maps to send me out to Strathcona. Because what they did was they reduced Strathcona's trucks, they reduced Airdrie's trucks, Leduc's trucks. They dropped all of the trucks down, and Edmonton and Calgary had to pick up the difference. So coming out of downtown Edmonton to a 9 Echo cardiac arrest, way the hell out in rural county, because they reduced the number of trucks to save money.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly. What the province did at the time was they reduced the number of trucks that the municipalities had been running, and they offset some of that perhaps to the larger municipalities, but the smaller rural municipalities suffered a net loss of trucks. Is that what you're telling me?
So in the immediately surrounding the two metro cities. So I'm just going to, and Nate, I apologize. I'm going to focus on Edmonton because I witnessed it. I was there walking it. So I know what happened there when it was Strathcona and Leduc and north of the city. They were all separate services, municipalities as well, and became contract service to AHS. And so then AHS said, well, we don't need 2 trucks in St. Albert. We'll go to 1. In Strathcona, you can go down to 2 from 3. And Leduc, same thing, 2 to 1. And Edmonton will be your support. And that was the thought of this. But then they didn't realize that Leduc truck goes to Edmonton for a transport. So Edmonton comes out to Leduc, and now Leduc is heading to St. Albert. Like, it became this thing that continues to grow today. And so we didn't have enough trucks in Edmonton. We were running code reds back in the 90s like you wouldn't believe. Our t-shirts said, code red, you're dead. That was our t-shirts that we wore under our uniforms. So this isn't new. This is 20 years, man.
So just for any listeners who aren't familiar with the vernacular, what is a code red?
Okay. Let's talk about a big event, a really big event, maybe Tornado 87, maybe the bus crash at Humboldt. When this massive event, it draws in every available resource that you have. Your system is code red. We don't have any more trucks. You're on your own. Do what you can with what you got. That's what it's designed for. That's why there's this intense level of we have hit code red. It's a big deal. Unfortunately, what's happened, Nate, is that code red happens every single friggin' day in this province. And it's happening all over the province. It's happening in rural Alberta. It's happening in urban municipalities. It's happening in the suburban communities. And it's because they don't have the resources they need to do the job. What we've done is reduce the number of ambulances in that transition. We have never maintained call volume growth of the population to EMS resource levels. And they can't keep up. So the intent of a code red is when it's the biggest event and it sucks all resources available. But we're doing that every single day in Alberta.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you just told me is that the EMS system in Alberta is experiencing the equivalent of a major disaster every single day.
Nate, yes, it has become standard operations to run down to 0 ambulances in Calgary, to draw in additional resources from outlying communities, to draw in resources from 100 kilometers away to try and maintain a response time of some kind. And when you look at that and see, well, we're not on a code red in Calgary because we have one truck sitting on the south side. Yeah, one truck for 200 kilometers in distance and 1.5 million in population. That's some dangerous times. Lives are lost in that scenario.
Now the HSAA has released some information, and I want to talk about the stuff that you guys released at the end of August, because at the end of August you released some information that was very specific to the number of code reds or red alerts or whatever flavor of Mountain Dew we're talking about, and it included some, quite frankly, some shocking statements, up to and including there was one that stated that people have died because of this. Is that true?
So Nate, I'm going to give you this first. In the Mountain Dew comment, it's Dr. Pepper in my world. Okay, I'm just going to throw that on the table. All right. Because this is such a bloody serious conversation that we're going to get into here, friend. Yeah. When you look at waiting 60 minutes for an ambulance for your critical 911 call, there is significant impact in the outcomes that you will face. And when I'm getting message after message from members on the front line saying, this happened, this is the outcome, and at times the outcome is that the person did not survive their injury or their insult. Would it have been different? Well, we'll never know because it took you an hour to get there. And you can just imagine being that crew trying to get to an event that is that critical, because their dispatch centers are updating them as they're driving to these calls, saying, this is the call. This is the call. It's getting more serious. Where are you guys? How far out are you? Well, we're still 50 kilometers from this event. Like, the mental impact of the paramedics trying to get to these calls. The fact that a dispatcher has to hit emergency disconnect to hang up on caller 1 to pick up caller 2 is insane. And this is how the system is functioning. It's fractured. It's broken, Nate. That's where we're at.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what you just said there about the impact of paramedics' mental health. Because we hear, and I really don't want to understate and we're going to come back to it, I really don't want to understate the severity of the situation on patients who are needing to access or who are calling for help during times almost certainly for the vast majority of them, some of the worst crises of their lives. I don't want to understate that, so we will come back to it. But you brought up the question of paramedic mental health and the effect on paramedics. What are you hearing from your membership about the one of the phrases that we've certainly seen reported in media is moral injury. And that's the idea of when a person knows that they could be doing better if they had the opportunity, but they're not provided that opportunity for whatever the reasons may be. What are you hearing from your frontline paramedics about the effect of these prolonged and repeated code reds?
When you look at the front lines of a healthcare system, and specifically emergency response within the healthcare system, these folks are being tasked with responding to a person's worst day, worst nightmare, worst, you name it. And already they operate at a heightened level of intensity every single day, because they are not just traveling to make widgets. They are dealing with life and death decisions. They are dealing with critical incidences, mass casualty incidences every single day. And I mean, you look at the snowfall that we had here 2 days ago, there were 4 fatalities in and around the city on one day. There's a good chance that one of those crews hit probably 2 of those events that day. And that's what a day looks like for a paramedic. And when you add the intensity to haven't had a meal break, can't find a bathroom, haven't got out of the truck yet today because I'm just going call to call to call. And now I'm taking 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes to get to this event. The anxiety, no, that's not the right word. The intensity that they are operating under takes a toll. Moral injury is not a description that comes to me from members on the front line, Nate. The description from members on the front line is absolute devastation from being in this environment, not just for their 12-hour shift, but for the 13th and 14th and 15th hour, because they can't get back to the station to even get off the truck. There are just so many calls stacking up on top, which means that system is broke. They are running these crews into their 14th and 15th hour. And guess what? In 12 hours, you got to come back and do it again. And so the important piece here is that these are also just human beings. I'll tell you right now, they're superheroes in my eyes, but they have all the issues of family and childcare and all of the stuff that goes along with it. And when you have to work your 13th and 14th hour and your kid's still in daycare and your spouse needs to get to work because you were their exchange on the kid, like these pressures are only compounded by the fact that that last call took me 30 friggin' minutes to get there, and the outcome is what kills them, man.
One of the things that I think is important to highlight as well, or that I'd like to get your opinion on, is there are certainly anecdotal stories that even 10 years ago, when the system was not failing to the degree that you're saying that it is now, that the average career length for somebody who was getting into EMS was about 5 to 7 years. And I think that speaks to the pressures that are associated with the job, the stresses that are associated with the job. But that was at a time where the resource depletion, for lack of a better term, was nowhere near as severe as it is. Do you have any concerns, or have you heard from your membership any concerns about effectively a brain drain or a talent drain going on within the industry?
It's absolutely, there's a couple of pieces that we're gonna talk to on this one. One, the exodus today. Have a look at paramedics that are out there working the streets today. There's not a lot of gray hair on the road. I'll tell you that right now. These folks are doing less than 10 years on a career like that. That is the entire career. If they were a hockey player, they'd be doing 1.7 mil, right? Like these guys are being run to the bone. They're lasting about 10 years, and it is the exodus to anything but. Now, you take your paramedic degree and you head out into the open market Well, there's not a lot of, so you're going back to school. You're going back to get retrained. So that means you have to, this is all in. You're committing that you are walking away forever from this job and never coming back again. That's what's happening out there. Further to that, Nate, I got to tell you, schools aren't producing the next generation of paramedics either. The one that's near me here at Edmonton is doing 25 this year in a class. Well, that doesn't even cover the retirements. Well, we've only had a couple. That doesn't cover the exodus. That's the reality of this. Our folks aren't hitting retirement. They aren't ringing the bell after 35 years on the road. So they're gone long before that. And the brain drain reality of this is that there is a shift now to taking the advanced care paramedics, because we don't have any, and doubling up to primary care paramedics on a truck, which is a whole different level of treatment regimes that they have. And I have some concerning information that they're going to bring in and introduce another level of EMRs back onto the road to try and fill the truck, put a warm body on there. And this is what they're desperate for now, because, well, as you alluded to at the opening of your segment here, there's been some talk about how many new paramedics have been added in the last few weeks in EMS that we're going to get to very shortly, I hope.
Oh, we will. I also want to just clarify a few points because you kind of alluded to it there, and I think it's important to provide some context. When we're talking about paramedics, there are multiple skill levels that we're talking about here. There's the EMR level that you just referred to, and if that stands for emergency medical responder. And then there's the other levels. From a operational perspective, what are the differences? Like, is it less than ideal to not have one of those high level paramedics that you talked about?
I need to first say this. When you are dealing with paramedics in the general term on the street, they are given all they can. They are the highest trained that you can get to that point, and full respect to everything that they do on the job today. The training levels start off with an EMR. It's I believe about 2 months or 3 months of the training, and we don't really use EMRs a lot in Alberta. The next level is an additional year and a bit plus practicums. So now you've got almost 2 years of training. And then the advanced care paramedic is where you find the advanced airway procedures, the cricothyrotomy, the surgical cuts in the throat, Nate, or needle decompressions where they will pierce your chest to save a damaged lung. These kinds of advanced treatments, their pharmaceutical regime is immense. I believe there are up to 70 different drugs that the advanced care paramedic will have access to in doing their job in your living room. Never mind getting into the hospital. This happens in your living room with these folks. I believe, and it's not big in Alberta, but Canada-wide on a national piece, the CCP or the critical care folks, you'll find them on some flight crews in BC, sometimes in Ontario. And it's an additional component that I think we're working towards within this profession as well, but we're just not quite there yet. So when you have an advanced care paramedic, they have everything the emergency room does to deal with your medical emergency. The primary care paramedic has a different subset of skills that they are expert in than the advanced care folks that are out there. I hope that helps clarify a little bit on.
Yeah, it does. And I think I really appreciate the fact that you highlighted at the opening of that regardless of what the skill level is, it's every single practitioner's doing everything in their skill set or what they're allowed to do in order to provide the highest level of patient care possible. Because the last thing that I want any of this to be interpreted as is that we're in any way diminishing any of the efforts that any paramedics are bringing to the table, regardless of what their designated skill level is. So let's talk about the current situation. So there's been a lot of, I'll say, conflicting information that's been presented in the media. I've certainly read interviews and media stories where somebody from the HSAA, often you, will raise concerns about the red alerts or the no ambulances available. And the response seems to be, well, there's always an ambulance available. Can you square that circle for me?
Sure. So my comments have always said, when there's no trucks in the city, I'll say that there's no trucks in the city of Calgary as an example. And the employer will come back absolutely and say, no, there was one coming. So what they do in this system is they just assign the next closest truck. It's called a clock stopper, in my opinion. I hope your folks can appreciate what I'm going to say here. When you dial 911, they need to assign a truck to stop the clock on how long it takes to dispatch a unit to your call. Well, they have gone through a few different renditions of using paramedic response units or an SUV, as single paramedic units are out there kind of roving around as a last ditch effort to try and save the system. But you need a transport truck. You need a bloody ambulance to come because you can't fit in the back of an SUV. So they will attach the nearest ambulance. And sometimes it's on the other side of the city. Sometimes it's in the next community. Sometimes it's in friggin' Fort McLeod. But that truck will be attached to your 911 call. Clock is stopped. Doesn't matter how long it takes to get there now, but the clock is stopped. And the hope is at some point in the hour it takes for Fort McLeod or Red Deer to get to your call in Calgary, that some other paramedic unit will clear up out of a hospital and they can be redispatched and will send Fort McLeod back to Fort McLeod, or just keep them coming into Calgary because we're so bloody busy, which is more of the way it goes. My hometown is just outside of Lethbridge, and Lethbridge was doing calls in North Calgary over the weekend. So you tell me, never mind just getting from Lethbridge to Calgary, they were on the north side of Calgary. So that's about 2.5 hours from their home station. And tell me something, who the hell was working Lethbridge? My hometown, Coaldale, was covering Lethbridge. Like, that's how messed up this system is.
I want to get into how this happened a little bit.
Sure.
So there's certainly a lot of hyperbolic language that's been passed around in the media, on social media, about whose fault this is. And I think that that's kind of a sketchy road to go down, because what you're describing sounds like it's happened over a long period of time, at least a decade. Are you super concerned with a sign? Like, is it a fair, let's do this. Is it a fair statement to say that this is the result of neglect of the EMS system for a prolonged period of time that's overlapped multiple governments?
Multiple governments, generational on the paramedics on the front lines, Nate. As I said, when I started in Edmonton in 96, there were code reds once in a while. And I mean, like, once in a while. And everybody kind of jaw dropped and went, holy hell, this is a big deal. Generationally, we have now a workforce who has been in this level of intensity for pre-pandemic, for this government, the last government, the government before that. Nobody has given a full eye to this because they have become this tool. They have become this piece of the healthcare system where it doesn't impact the healthcare system. If a paramedic unit sits at a hospital for 5 hours or 6 hours, that patient is being cared for by absolute perfect care, one-on-one care with paramedics in the hospital hallways. And I guess 5 hours is a bit of a under exaggeration, Nate, because I know that people go to work, get taken to the hospital, spend 12 friggin' hours in the hospital on shift, and then go back home and get relieved in the hospital. So what's happened is they have not been resourcing ambulances. They have not been hiring people, and population growth, call volume increase, add opioid overdose, add COVID. I mean, hell, the employer is saying it was a smoky day or too snowy is a big issue. Well, Christ, we live in Alberta. It does snow here. We do have a bit of smoke every summer from BC. So if you haven't planned for that, again, failure on the employer, failure on the government for not supporting the members on the front line.
Okay. I want to unpack this hallway weights business a little bit. So you just said that you've heard stories of paramedics who have started their shift and transport a patient to the hospital and spend the duration of their 12-hour shift sitting in the hallway. Why aren't those paramedics getting back out onto the street?
And I can say this because I've done it before I took this role. I know what it's about. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things, Nate. I want to talk about these crews that goes in the house. So not every call for a paramedic is the high intensity gunshots, car accidents, all of these things. Sometimes there are patients that just need to get in for further follow-up on medical incidents. Well, they're not critical trauma room patients, but they do need to go to the hospital by a paramedic unit. So when they get to the hospital and the waiting room is full and they show up there with a patient, well, when you triage them, they are at the same level as the folks over here. So now you got to wait and you got to wait. And that wait becomes 8 to 10 hours. I remember getting disciplined when I took more than 30 minutes to get out of the hospital as a young paramedic in Edmonton. 30 minutes. And I had to explain why I was buggering around in the hospital back then. And it took me more than 30 minutes to clear. Today, you will go to work at times. I won't say it's every day and every time. Okay, Nate, I don't want to make that reality, but here's what it is. You show up at work, your truck isn't in the station. Supervisor phones and says, we're either going to send you an SUV over or get a cab or whatever it's going to be. You're going over to the Rocky View or the Royal Alex, and you're going to relieve your night shift crew. They're going to take that cab back and go home, and you're going to stay there. And since you're there, there's other crews that need to get off shift as well. So you take their patients. And since you're there, you might as well stay for the day. And since you're there, all of a sudden it's 12 hours later. And that crew that you relieved is showing back up at the hospital so that you can go home. Like that is a real life scenario for a paramedic today. And I want to touch on one more piece here. They've got some pretty bizarre shift schedules out there that include something called a core flex. Now, a core flex is designed for rural, remote, suburban communities that used to do a few calls a day. Not enough to have 12-hour shifts, full block or full complement of paramedics to staff that ambulance for 12-hour rotations. So the core flex folks stay technically on call 24 hours a day for 4 days straight. The core part is that you come to work, you do your unit checks, you do your equipment checks, you do all of those things to make your truck ready for the day, but you will remain available for the rest of the night for the community that you live in. Well, what they've done with that system now is run those folks in excess of 16 hours every day. They end up timing out due to occupational health and safety regulations, and then they get booked off for 8 hours and then back on the shift again. Like, talk about an abusing of a workforce. Absolutely bizarre in that case. I know that's not, you were focusing on hospital waits. Why are they continuing today? Well, we have less inpatient beds in hospitals today than we did 20 years ago. Go back to the hospital we blew down in Calgary back in the in 80, 90 something. They blew down a hospital in Calgary. My hometown hospital closed. There are no beds. They keep depleting our healthcare system, privatizing that stuff that they can, and we're stuck in this environment where paramedics sit in a hallway. Well, the patients sit in the hallway for days, and our paramedics sit in the hallway for their entire shift.
Okay. Would it be safe to say that hallway waits contribute to some of the burnout or the moral injury or whatever term we want to use? Would it be safe to say that those hallway waits are contributing to that? Because it seems to me when I think of like an 18-year-old kid who's deciding to be a paramedic or perhaps older, who knows, they're probably basing that largely not on the waiting in a hospital hallway. Like, you don't see a whole lot of TV shows where you get an hour of a paramedic waiting in a hospital hallway with a demented person or somebody suffering from dementia. I feel like that's probably not the biggest reason why people go into the profession of paramedicine. One would think if somebody wanted to be working in a clinical setting like a hospital, that they would pursue a role that's designed for a clinical setting like a hospital. But it seems to me that the profession of paramedicine is not historically been that. Is that I don't know, career whiplash or whatever you want to call it? Is that contributing to the burnout?
I'm going to say this as an 18, well, I guess you'd be about 22 by the time you get out of school or 19, but absolutely. You show up, well, you probably find out in school that you made a career choice that probably isn't what it looked like on television for sure. And the members are disenfranchised by this. Like, you show up at work and you stand in a hallway. Yeah, you get to do some of your advanced care stuff that you've been trained on for sure. But, you know, there are some really tragic events that paramedics will be exposed to, but there's also the beautiful events. And those beautiful events are the ones that bring you back the next day. The delivery of a child in a living room, you know, or the cutting of a cord, or any number of things, resuscitating a cardiac arrest, your first one ever, you never forget it. You never forget it, you know? And the bad stuff and the good stuff will balance out, except in this case, they're standing in a hallway for 12 hours. They are dealing with, maybe a dementia patient that they're sedating every 45 minutes. Maybe it's a long-term care patient that has a UTI and needs to be taken to the bathroom every 15 minutes for 12 hours straight. That is not why paramedics went to school. And you're right. Paramedics went to school because they want to be out there. And in -20, in +40, they want to be out there. On the highway, in a car wreck, they want to be out there. They don't want anybody to get hurt, but they sure as hell want to be there when it happens. You know, that's what a paramedic is built for. And when you stuff them into a hallway, I would say, maybe I'll let you play that moral injury term again. I'll get used to it a little bit here, I guess, if I have to, because you are correct.
Okay. Would you say, based on the feedback that you've heard from your members, that it's part of that, and we're going to use moral injury a lot now, I think. Part of that moral injury is for paramedics to be in the hallway of a hospital when they know that their region, whether it's rural or a medium municipality or a large municipality, when they know that there's a red alert out there and they know that there are people who are calling 911 and they're in a hospital hallway, does that contribute to some of that burnout that's causing this brain drain?
I will let you use fully the word moral injury in this scenario that we're going to talk about here, because every paramedic has a radio on their hip. They know exactly what's going on in the city. They know exactly what's going on the maps on their screens. When you see not a single metro truck available in the city, and you see a Vermilion truck driving into Edmonton, or a Fort McLeod truck, I keep picking on these two places, but you see them driving into the city, you know that they are responding lights and sirens. And if I listen, I could probably hear them going past the South Hospital, heading towards a call. I know the call's in the North End. They've still got 45 minutes to go to get to that event. And I'm sitting here. I know that we haven't resourced the system properly. I know that we haven't taken care of our frontline people that we have asked to take care of us as citizens of this province. We've left them in a failed system where, I guess I'm going to have to go there, the only outcome is moral injury. That's it. There's nothing else left. The devastation that this takes, and then to know the moment I hit this button, that screen's going to pop up with a high priority call as soon as I clear, because they are waiting for a paramedic to clear up out of the hospital. So I'm going to do what I can to get out. I'm going to try and clear. I'm going to grab, I don't know, a sandwich off the dash, hopefully take a pee as I'm running out the door, and I'm back at it again. There is no way. Listen, if you were running a battle unit on the front lines on the Western Front, you don't leave your troops in the trenches for years. You get them off the line. You let them reset, collect their thoughts so they can go back the next day and do the job that you're going to ask them to do. And in this case, what they're doing is to continue to just keep flowing them through. We can get another one and replace them, and just whatever, you give me your 5 years and get out the door, and here's the next one. And that's the mentality that the employer has created. And that destroys our pride, our paramedic services.
I would imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that, I mean, the technical skills that are involved in some of the treatments that you listed off are not insignificant, I would say. But I would also imagine that one of the biggest skills that paramedics develop and bring to bear on the situations that they encounter are also the soft skills. And those soft skills would take time to develop. So is there a concern for you that because it seems like we're cycling through so many paramedics so quickly, that not only are we not developing the skill sets that are going to be best suited to manage the worst case scenarios, but we're driving out the people who have developed those skill sets?
When you talk about soft skills, what I envision is this. When my mom needed paramedics to come to her aid, these beautiful folks took care of her. They made sure that she was, it sounds so simple, comfortable. They made sure she had a warm blanket. They made sure that she had all of her items that she needed. These are all the soft skill pieces. When I would walk into an 85-year-old woman's home, sometimes the medical reason she has phoned is nowhere near the issue that she truly has. And what she needs is the trained eye, the comforting hand, to take care of this woman in her time. That isn't taught in school. Managing a mass casualty incident is. Learning how to talk to a person and learning how to care for a person is a special skill. And I don't know, well, I do know. I know enough of the members on the front line today that is very difficult to go from back-to-back calls to being switched off and immediately into a compassionate caregiver role for the next few hours with this person. It is that is a skill set that now that you've suggested it, I fear for that. That is what makes us human beings, is that compassion. And if this current scenario that these folks are trying to work under is eroding that ability, it just pisses me off even more that we're talking, Nate, right now.
Okay. We're talking a lot about brain drain. We're talking a lot about loss of skill set. And I would be remiss if I did not ask you for your reaction to some comments that were reported out of the legislature today. So today in question period, there were quite a few questions. And again, November 30th, for anyone who's keeping score at home. There were a few very significant questions about the situation of EMS in Alberta, because it certainly does seem that it's starting to gain a larger profile than certainly we've seen in recent history. There were two comments in particular that I'd like to get your reaction to. The first comment came from the Premier, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the words directly in front of me, but in effect, he said that the problem of resource depletion and red alerts is a problem that we haven't seen for a month. Now, we pushed out a graphic from HSAA, we amplified a graphic from HSAA 2 days ago that talked about an ambulance from Vauxhall responding to Calgary because it was the only available unit. And I want to talk about that situation specifically in a bit, but before we do, what's your reaction when you hear about the Premier of Alberta standing up in the legislature and saying that the problem doesn't exist in the capacity that the HSAA has been working very hard to tell a very different story?
Okay. I'm gonna step us into this conversation, and we're gonna end with a full on the 500 that he stated here. This summer, the EMS Chief Sandbach says we're gonna move 100 people into the system. The old Health Minister Chandro says we're moving 100 people into the system. Nothing happens. 2 weeks ago, Minister Copping, the new health minister, says we've added 200 paramedics. So obviously things are looking good. And then today, the premier stands up and says we've added, like the fact that he said 500, like pump your own tires, brother. What are you talking about? Like we've only got 2,200 in the whole friggin' province and you've added 500? Where from? Because recently we needed additional resources under a COVID strain. We couldn't find 30 healthcare workers from across the country to back us up in this province. And somehow the premier has found 500. I challenge anybody to call me and say that they are one of those 500 people that have been hired, because they have not. They didn't hire the 100, they didn't do 200, and they sure as hell haven't done 500 as they've stated today. Now, you've also asked about this code red that we haven't seen in almost a month. Well, I don't know what calendar he might be looking at, because I'm pretty sure, and I haven't seen today's results, I'm sorry, but 2 days ago, when the Vauxhall ambulance was the closest unit to a call in the city of Calgary. Now, it's been a while. Vauxhall's north of my old hometown. That's got to be 140 kilometers. That might be a record breaker right friggin' there, I think. But I got to wait, because I need the data to get processed here. But that truck being the only truck to Calgary. Now draw a circle from Vauxhall all the way around Calgary. That's the nearest truck from where? Canmore, Kananaskis, Fort McLeod, Sundre. Like, keep going, man. How far do I got to go to hit 150K around? How big of an area is that? And that was the only truck available for a call.
There's a lot to unpack there. Here's the fundamental question that I think I want to ask. In your opinion, because we have heard, I mean, certainly when the Calgary Fire Department was doing their budget pitch recently, they were talking about target response times, and they in particular talked about target response times for cardiac arrests, which is probably the most catastrophic event that anyone can imagine experiencing or witnessing a loved one experiencing. Do you feel confident that under the system as it currently stands, that Albertans can feel confident that they're going to receive timely EMS care in the appropriate amount of time?
Okay. If you were to live in a rural, remote community, population 200, do you think you should get the same care as the city of Edmonton? I think that knowing that you can't even get groceries in that community tells you that, no, that's not the expectation of rural, remote communities. In the past, our target response sat at 6:59. So 6 minutes, 59 seconds, 90% of the time is what their goal was. Couldn't even come close to it. So what do? Change the time to 8:59, 90% of the time. Couldn't hit that one either. So their new motto is the right truck to the right patient at the right amount of time, whatever the hell that means. So no, people in this province must understand and realize the situation that we are in. We cannot get an ambulance to you in a timely fashion right now, the way the system is operating. Do I know how many trucks are needed? How many paramedics are needed? No. AHS has those numbers, and they are holding back on that data. And when you hear comments from the premier saying there's no such thing as a code red, we've added 500 personnel to the road, neither one of them is true. And I'm pretty sure that if you do a call out to your members after this conversation and say, who is the 500 that have been hired? I'm curious to know your answer, because that you can't just add water, grow a paramedic. It doesn't work that way. There's also these conversations out there going, just get the private companies out there that are doing nothing. They can come and do those calls. Well, I've seen the pickup truck with a camper on the back that says medical treatment center working in the oil patch. That is the last thing I want responding to a 911 call in the city of Calgary. Let's be clear. I want the professionals that we have. I want them resourced properly, and I want them damn well taken care of, because we are failing these people.
The last question that I have for you, and I always say last question, and then I ask two more. I don't know if I warned you about that at the beginning. It's just, it's a theme.
I'll take it forward. Okay.
There was a report that was commissioned by the provincial government. And one of the recommendations out of that report had to do with the potential privatizing of interfacility transfers. Now, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, interfacility transfers are when a patient is already inside of the healthcare system in some capacity and they are moved to a different location either for treatment or assessment or who knows what. What's your stance on that? Is that a good thing? I mean, we opened up the conversation by talking about how EMS was moved away from private companies decades ago because of problems with it. And we're talking about potentially moving it back to private companies. Yay or nay?
No, absolutely not. I got to first say this, Nate. We have members who are dedicated paramedic professionals that do every bit as good as every other paramedic in this province who work for private companies. There are certain communities out there that are contracted to private companies, and it is not the members that I want to disenfranchise here whatsoever. I just fundamentally will not support for-profit healthcare in any way, shape, or form. For-profit 911. When I was working for one of those private companies back in the early 90s, we had a visa machine under the seat of the ambulance. So you would transport someone, and if they didn't have Blue Cross, well, let's check and see what you got in the wallet there, bud, because you got to pay for this trip. That's what it looked like back then. Nobody should be denied care because of their ability to pay. And when you move into a for-profit system, a shareholder-driven system, it increases the risk of our members because shortcuts are getting taken for shareholder profits. And I don't want to ever go down this path. Our paramedics, and you had talked earlier about some of our senior paramedics with that knowledge base that they have, that caregiving ability that they carry, that has been honed over 20 years of doing this job. Some of those folks are the best role models to follow within an IFT world of an interfacility transfer unit that has highly complicated pumps and drips and a patient who is scared shitless that needs a confident hand and a competent hand to care for them. And if we're just going to offload it because it's a cheaper, faster model that puts everybody at risk, not in whatsoever.
Do you have any concerns? I mean, what you just described there with the interfacility transfer thing almost sounds like in the broad medical world, there's different specialties. So, for example, an ICU nurse is different than an obstetrician or birth nurse. And we saw nurses raise that concern with the pandemic, where they were talking about, this is not my sandbox. I'm not super thrilled about going into the ICU because this is not a sandbox that I've played in. And while there's certainly no question that all nurses receive certain training, I think that there's definitely an argument that some of that training becomes more specialized depending on the area that they practice in. Is it safe to say that some of the things that you're talking about, like these interfacility transfers versus emerge calls, are different specialties and should be recognized as such?
I would suggest that you're on a path that is correct here, because every paramedic is trained in a similar fashion. They all have to be regulated through a college. They all have mandated annual training credit they must achieve every year to ensure they are at a specific level. From there, we have interfacility transfer, we have 911 emerge units, we have community-based paramedics, we have, well, I'm going to get in trouble with you here. I don't know the term in Calgary, but we call them tactical medics in Edmonton that are integrated with our police teams. There are all sorts of specialty pieces that make up our healthcare system. And the person that finds their way into those jobs is the one best suited for those jobs. Because walking in or walking out of school, you have no idea what you're in for. And the first call could be your career end or critical call. Or maybe it is that you decide you want to work in a facility because you will never have a gun pointed in your face again, hopefully. You know, these are the kinds of pieces that keep folks up at night. These are the kind of pieces that allow for career longevity so that they can move around to give the best that they have in an environment that they can flourish. And that is a piece that needs to be really, I would suggest, critically looked at. My license is now 25 some years old. I'll tell you what, I am nowhere near passing a tactical medic's physical. I'll just say that right now, friend. But I'm okay with not putting on body armor and spending the day maybe taking patients for their next chemotherapy and being the confident hand with them to do that. So maybe that's something that we could dig deeper into another time, Nate.
Okay. My last two questions, he said cautiously. Told you. If you could wave a magic wand and you could address some of these systemic issues that we've talked about here, what would you want to see done?
Nate, I'm going to tell you, we started off this conversation a little bit about what a code red looked like and how I would be comfortable in assessing a code red in the highest level of an incident. Like, again, the tornado or the Humboldt. You can't staff an emergency service to that level and have every 100 feet a paramedic sitting on a street corner. I get it. But code reds should be never achieved unless there is something so critical like that level of disaster, which means you need to staff these resources to a point where there is a paramedic available for you in that appropriate amount of time. And don't tell me it's the right truck to the right patient. There is studies out there after studies, and it has nothing to do with the right truck. It has to do with getting there and getting paramedics in the front door of your house. And that's what we need to get to, because we have tried 150 some regimes of getting paramedics out of the hospital. Maybe try building another hospital. I don't know. There's a crazy idea. But what we need to do is get the paramedic boots on the ground in this province to ensure that every person has access to 911 paramedics when they call. And I would also add, get enough bloody dispatchers in those centers so they don't have to hang up on this caller to pick up that call.
Okay. For people who are listening to this episode or watching this episode who are concerned about the fact that they if they have an emergency, or if their loved one, whether it's their spouse or their grandparent or their kid, if they're concerned after this conversation that they won't have an ambulance showing up in a timely fashion, what would you recommend to members of the public that they should be doing in order to address that? Because fundamentally, I mean, the one of the themes that I'm taking out of this conversation is that fundamentally what paramedics are trying to do is, as you said at the very beginning, take care of people, be there for people when they're having that worst day ever. What would you say members of the public should do in order to make sure that paramedics are available to be able to respond in a timely fashion?
We might end up down two paths here, Nate. I'm going to try with this answer, and let's see if you ask me 4 more questions. Deal?
Sounds good.
Okay. What the citizens of this province need to do, and they need to do it now, is they need to protect those who are in charge of protecting us. We need to care for our caregivers, raise the alarm, contact your MLAs, city council, town council, Reeves, talk to anybody across the fence. Go talk to a bloody paramedic and ask them if this is true. And they'll tell you what's going on out there. I'm one person. I need you to raise the alarm. Join me in this challenge that we are facing right now that has been a generation struggle. Join that Facebook page and watch what's going on in your communities. Because the last bloody thing I want is a call from a person out there that said, we waited too long for an ambulance. And knowing that that is coming, or maybe it has already somehow, I need their help. I need your listeners' help. I need the general public's help. This can't go on any longer. We are losing our paramedics and our patients. And I'm done with it. People need to understand we don't have enough resources out there to do this job anymore. The only fix is to get more paramedic boots on the ground, and Jason Kenney and his 500 is not true. And neither was Copping's 200 and neither was Chandro's 100. None of them are true. You should have been doing this as a leader over the last 10 years, AHS, but you've been dumping this one, not hiring, not promoting, not moving the system forward. You have failed the citizens of this province. So I need the citizens to help me stand up and protect each other and protect our paramedics.
If people have stories that they want to share with you, how do they do that?
There is a connection through that Facebook portal if that's where they are comfortable. Call your media, talk to them. Hell, call me. Well, don't email me, mikep@hsaa.ca, and we'll do what we can. We're trying, Nate. We have been trying to raise this alarm for a long time. Today, we ask members who are actually experiencing the episode of a Vauxhall to Calgary call to share with us what the hell's going on out there, because AHS is lying. Obviously, Kenny has got some magic paramedic powder that he's created 500 paramedics on that is absolute bunk. I'm telling you right now, they haven't added any. What they did try doing was saying in the summer, these 100 we're going to add are the casuals we're going to make full time. Well, let's just check here. Those casuals were already working full time plus. And now you've just shifted them over. It's great that the paramedics responding to your personal emergency now have a dental plan and some medical benefits, but that's all that's going to change. So.
Is there anything else you'd like people to hear? Is there anything else you want to convey to people?
I want to say this, Nate. This has been a long time that we've been talking about this. And every single day, paramedics on the front lines put on their uniforms and headed to work to do everything that they can to try and hold this system together. We are at a breaking point where minds are being destroyed. Moral injury, I'm going to give it to you. You can have it now officially, okay? You and me can share moral injury, I guess. Occupational stress injury, the mental health exhaustion and frustration they're facing is devastating to our paramedics and to the people that we trust with taking care of us. Something has to be done. And I want to thank every one of them for coming to work every day. We're doing what we can. It's not enough. We got to keep going. We got to keep going.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having this conversation, Mike. I really appreciate it. I'm certain our listeners and our viewers will find it informative. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Nate, if something changes, call me back and let's talk about a positive side of this world that we're working in. Okay, I'd love to. But until then, thank you so much for this story.
Now, before we get to the normal wrap-up that we would do at the end of the show, there's one request that I want to make specifically for this episode. If any parts of this episode have resonated for you, and if you're concerned about the state of emergency medical services in Alberta, please not only do the things that Mike talked about in the conversation that you just watched, but please also make sure that you share this episode, because more people need to be aware of what Mike talked about in this episode. It's really, really important information. So if it's relevant to you, if it in any way resonated with you, please share the episode. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.